that I can add or need to add to the conversation for anyone in this room. We know it's an important election. And I'm sure that you all know exactly how you are going to vote. I can't imagine when I hear about people who are undecided. I can't even imagine where you live in your head. Undecided at this point. It is an important election. But no matter who wins, we really need to talk. Because no matter who wins, there is something off. There is something fundamentally off. And many of the things that are the most fundamentally off aren't even discussed in these presidential debates, for instance. Nobody's asked, nor do I think they will be asking on Monday night, about the 23.1% child poverty rate in the United States. Among 35 developed nations in the world, the United States child poverty rate is second only to Romania. We have 46 million people living in poverty in the United States. We have 17,000 children who die of starvation every day on this earth. We have 1 billion people on the planet who live on the equivalent of $1.25 less a day. They are those defined as those living in deep poverty. And above that, you have another billion living on $2 and less a day. On a planet where there are only 7 billion people, you're talking about 2 billion people at least who live lives of profound desperation and even starvation. We have the highest incarceration rate in the United States, the highest incarceration rate in the world. Not only the highest incarceration rate in the world, we have the highest incarceration rate in history. Our educational system, we don't just have a dropout rate, ladies and gentlemen, we have a push-out rate. Because particularly among the African American and Latino communities, it is well understood by those who make a lot of money on this particular form of human suffering. They drop out, that's just the pipeline. Fill up all those prisons, which then become one of the single largest urban industries in the United States. And once again, not that most of us aren't even aware of the things that I just mentioned. In 2010, once again, most of us know this. In 2010, the Supreme Court of the United States came down with what many of us will be deemed one of the worst decisions ever made by a U.S. Supreme Court. It's called Citizens United. And Citizens United has now given unlimited permission for moneyed interests. It could be union, it could be corporate, it could be individuals, on an anonymous basis, to flood campaign seasons with money that is given to advertising expressly to elect or to defeat a candidate. In other words, in a very real way, it could be argued that the magnificent line of Lincoln's, by which he described the purpose for so many deaths of Northern soldiers in the Civil War, so that there could continue to exist on this earth a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Well, let us make no mistake. And once again, I don't think that I'm saying what anybody in this room doesn't know, or what millions and millions of people in this country do not know. But let us allow what we know to penetrate our hearts, and to penetrate whatever emotional resistance we might have to looking it squarely in the eye. We are in the process of changing the most profound social contract that is at the center of American democracy. We are already in the process of changing the agreement from government of the people and by the people and for the people to government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, for a few of the people. If we are going to change that social contract, please let it not go without debate. Now, Louis Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice, late Supreme Court Justice, said, you can either have large amounts of money held in the hands of a very few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. Now, why did he say that? Because large amounts of money are held in the hands of the few. Last time I was here in this church, we talked about Occupy. We talked about the social impulse arising from the very bottom of things by which people did protest the fact that 1% of the population of the United States controls 42% of the wealth. Now, what does this represent, among other things? Well, in the absence of any kind of public funding for political campaigns, and in the presence of the Citizens United new reality, it means that economic leverage buys political influence. Now, that's one thing to just say that, but let's talk about what it means. That economic leverage buys political influence. Why? Well, people can only get elected, and people can only stay in office if they have the money to buy the TV ads that will then allow them to be elected. That's why we have billions spent by Obama and Romney. Now, what is the problem then? The problem is that children have no economic leverage. Children have no economic leverage. They don't represent a financial interest. And so since children do not represent a financial interest, then they and anybody else in the country without financial leverage then has no political leverage. Which means all of this stuff about creating all people equal, liberty and justice for all, just flies out the window. And what it means is that we have subconsciously recreated a condition which is the very condition that this country was founded to repudiate. This country was founded to repudiate the ancient order, where a king, you and I were kids in school and we were taught about the divine right of kings, remember? And basically what that system was that kings and queens and their friends, their cronies, they were called the aristocracy. They took basically what they wanted. They took whatever material resources they wanted, they felt they were entitled, and then whatever crumbs fell off the floor. You know, whatever crumbs fell off the floor, because there had to be some crumbs to keep the serfs working, then were divvied up by everyone else. This country was founded in repudiation of that. This country was founded to say, no, actually, it should not matter how much money you have. It should not matter where you come from. It should not matter who your parents were or what your class is. This country belongs to all of us. Now, we know, of course, that most of the founders, most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were themselves slave owners. This is understood. The irony, in fact, was not lost on them. But the journey of American history has been the narrative by which, generation after generation, there were those forces that sought to expand and embody and further materialize the principles on which we purport to stand. And there were those forces that resisted that. So generation after generation would say, well, it's not just white men, thank you. It's also people of color, and it's also women. And this march continues. This march is alive and well today. This march is alive and well today in our generation saying, don't tell me gay people shouldn't be able to have the same pursuit of happiness everybody else does. This march is alive and well today with people who are just waiting in case anybody wants to try to tell any American that they cannot vote in Ohio on the day of the presidential election. And yet, these issues go deeper than mere politics. Because what we have is a two-party system, which was not mandated in the Constitution. The two-party system was not spelled out in the Declaration of Independence. In fact, when he gave his farewell address, George Washington warned us against political parties. And the greatest social justice movements in the United States have come from third-party forces. Abolition came from the Abolitionist Party. Women's suffrage came from the Women's Suffrage Party. The Civil Rights Movement, obviously, came from the movement itself. What has happened now is that the entire political conversation is dominated by two political parties. Now, one political party looks at the extraordinary suffering that I mentioned earlier. The suffering of 23.1% of America's children who live in poverty, 34% of all black children in the United States living in poverty, 46 million Americans living in poverty, our crumbling schools, our crumbling roads, our crumbling bridges, global poverty, starvation of 17,000 children a day. Once again, a fact that if you even allow it truly to penetrate your heart, you can hardly hold it. So one of our major political parties says, wow, it's sad, that's sad. Maybe, Jackie, you and your churches can help. You know, churches can pick up the slack. Good people, private charity, as though there's any level of private charity that can compensate for complete and utter lack of social justice. But we have another major political party, and while I hope it wins, let's be very clear. That major political party says, wow, we do care about all that suffering, and I don't doubt that either of them care. But we're not talking about passion just now, we're talking about action. And that second major political party does what it can to heal the suffering around the periphery. But it, at this point in our history, doesn't do that much more than the other major political party at challenging all those underlying forces that make all that suffering inevitable. I think, ladies and gentlemen, if there's going to be a politics of conscience, I think we're going to have to do it. When I was a young woman, I was raised in the era of feminism of the 1970s, where I looked at my mother's life. My mother was a very traditional housewife in many ways. She adored for my father, she lived for him, she lived for her children, she lived for our home, and she did a great job. But I looked at my mother's life and I felt it wasn't important enough. I wanted to go out into the world and do something important in the world. And it took me decades to realize how wrong my thinking was. First of all, as we know spiritually, there is no world. Secondly, when we started talking about the goddess and the divine feminine, and the rising up of the goddess and the divine feminine feminine, as she rises up, does more than just wear cut velvet and dance under the moon. The divine goddess is very big on this. Take care of the babies, and take care of the home. And my mother was right. That is a woman's job. Take care of the babies, and take care of the home. That is what the feminine in men and women says. Take care of the babies, take care of the home. But we have evolved to the realization that when we are in mature social, political, and spiritual consciousness, we get it. Every child on this planet is one of our children, and the earth itself is our home. Particularly if the children are adolescents or anywhere near. There's a line that you hear yourself saying. You didn't know if you would ever say it, but sure enough, it's coming out of your mouth. Young lady or young man, that will not be happening in this house. It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be sex, whatever it is, that will not be happening in this house. Do you understand me? And you're really laughing inside yourself because you don't even know what you do if they challenge you, but that look on your face is so fierce that they probably don't. Well, can you imagine what would happen? Can you join with me in a moment and just know that it will happen? When enough of us rise up, knowing who we truly are, what our truly spiritual and social function is on this planet and in this universe. And we look at children dying of starvation in a world in which there is no dearth of food. A world in which we spend so much more on figuring out ways to wage war than in figuring out ways to wage peace. On a planet where our irreverence towards the planet itself does nothing short of imperil human survival. On a planet where billions of people are barely able to survive the day. And where children are living in child poverty in the richest nation of the world. Can you imagine when we rise up and we get it and we say it with the conviction that the Course in Miracles says brings forth miracles? That will not be happening in this house. revolution which proposes a new worldview. And that means a new bottom line, as Gabby was saying. We need to propose a shift in something much more than the periphery. We need to propose without apology that there be a new bottom line, that there be a new ordering principle for human civilization. That instead of ordering human civilization according to economic principles, that we, and economic values, that we begin to order human civilization according to humanitarian values. Now, when you and I say, let's make love the bottom line, when you and I mature to the point of knowing that won't always be easy and that won't always be convenient. Because when you talk about love and intimate relationships, it's like, ooh, let's talk more. When we talk about love in terms of total personal transformation, ooh, I want some of that. When we talk love in terms of our jobs and our careers, it's, oh, yeah, tell me how. When we talk love in terms of society and economics and war and peace and social policies and tax policies and corporate subsidies, and we propose that love be the bottom line, oh, you're going too far here. You're going too far. And first, we will be hit with this one. We're so naive. We're so naive. We don't understand the big topics, you see. The idea that love will be the bottom line is just naive. Well, I would like to propose this. Anybody who thinks that we can continue the way we are, that we can continue to wage war like it was a little boy's game of Legos, that we can continue to mess with the planet the way we do, that we can continue to allow those who suffer to grow in population to the point where their desperation and their desperate acts and pathological behavior is almost inevitable. Anybody who thinks we can do that and still survive as a species for another 100 years, they're naive. They're naive. Sometimes we scream at television, you know, we get all worked up. We hear voices of hate, and it drives us nuts. We hear it in the political dialogue today. It's not just that we have acts of terrorism and people around the world, many who have developed a kind of political force field based on hate. It's not even just that, it's the hate and the hateful speech and the hateful actions that are taken by people here in this country within the domain of politics. And yet, you and I, as much as we might complain about those who speak so loudly with voices of hate, what I want to talk to you about today is that the real problem, particularly in a free society, is not that some people speak with hate. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, we are speaking too softly when it comes to love. Anytime there is a terrorist act, whether it's domestic or international, the President of the United States always talks about what a cowardly act it was. And anytime that word cowardly is used in connection with terrorism, I always tilt my head because I think, okay, I could go with unconscionable, I could go with evil. I'm not sure that I can go with cowardly. The truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, hatred has a perverse kind of courage. I've never, I can't even conceive of kind of sort of casually, you know, sometimes when it's convenient, committed terrorists. These are people who have made it very, very clear that they have a worldview that they will effectuate at any cost. But on the other hand, I know there are many people, and I count myself as having been among them as much as anyone else, who, you know, sometimes casually, you know, when it's convenient, committed to love. And that is because we are all enamored with easy love. We're all enamored with convenient love. We're all enamored, particularly for those of us who are women, with the kind of love that will not make them mad at us, that will not make them want to embarrass us, that will not make them seek to humiliate us. Well, it's very interesting because I know two main groups of people in my life. I know one group of people who are very concerned about the type of things that I've been talking about here today. They're very savvy about politics, you see. But they're just babies in the world of consciousness, in the world of personal transformation, recovery, yoga, Course in Miracles, prayer, religious life, spiritual. They're just babies. They haven't started that process yet. And then I know another large group of people who are no longer babies on the path of personal transformation. That path of personal transformation has led to a real visceral understanding of the kind of principles that change our lives, have walked through their own journeys, through their own dark nights of the soul, have understood and come to understand that if we want to transform anything, whether it's a person or a society, you've got to start on the inside. That you can't just change things on the outside. You have to own what you're about and face what you're about, and face your own demons and your own darkness and your own journey. And where are you a hypocrite? And where are you not standing on? And where are you not facing your personal defects? And where are you not owning and atoning and making amends? Now that group has been disconnected from politics. Either can't remember what you learned in the 7th grade, or even more than that, the current political dialogue in America is so toxic. It's so dark, it's so angry, that the spiritual among us say, I don't want to go anywhere near there. I mean, that's everything we're trying to get rid of. That's what we're trying to get rid of within ourselves, so we don't even want to go there. And yet, that's a conundrum. Because only the most counterfeit version of enlightenment would ever let you think you get a pass, particularly in the name of spirituality, from attending to the suffering of other people. Share with Jackie, and what I share with so others, and what I'm delighted to be able to share with you here today. As I said before, there are a lot of people who know about politics, but they're real babies on the journey of consciousness, and it's going to take them a few years to catch up. But when it comes to all the people who are no longer babies in the realm of, in the journey of consciousness, we've been around a few years, you've been doing it, you get what it's really about, but you just kind of feel like, wow, I don't know all the facts, and I'm a little bit disconnected, I don't quite know. Give me a couple of weekends and I'll tell you everything. Right. I'm doing it a bit. I'm doing it in Los Angeles because I live there. It's as simple as that. I've lived here quite a lot. I've known many of you. I've known you for many years. But Sister Giant, you know, I don't have a mecca complex. I don't believe in a mecca complex. I lived through the 60s. The 60s were many rock and roll bands, many political voices, etc. The real social revolution is not held by one person or even a small group of people. There is something that's coming up from the bottom of things, something coming up from the bottom of things, and it's on the planet. It's not any one ethnic group, it's not any one nationality. It's a force of light, it's an impulse of evolution by which we understand at the deepest level, on a cellular level, that a change is coming, and a change is demanded, and history is saying, will you be willing to make the changes within yourself and within your collective behavior? Because we can have paradise, ladies and gentlemen. And there are many, many, many wonderful things about this country. The only thing about this country, there are many, many, many wonderful things about this country. It's just we've gotten to a point where too few people, compared to the massive population, are able to be in the club that has that wonderfulness. You can't sustain, it's unsustainable when too relatively few people have access to the opportunities that make so much possible, should we work hard enough and embrace those opportunities. So what is happening right now is that this impulse that's rising up, I'm not saying it's rising up in America any more than it's rising up anywhere else, but we see these forces of light, of enlightenment. You know, this is the 21st century, it's not the 20th century. The 20th century was a different mindset than the 19th century. And the 21st century is a different mindset. And this mindset of newness and enlightenment, you know, we talk about American exceptionalism. Well, there's a real shadow to that concept when people use it in this kind of nationalistic way, is that we're just better. And even then, it's even worse than that. Not only are we better, but you can just bequeath it to your children, that they'll be better. That is not only unexceptional, it is a dark and toxic idea. But that is not to say that there's not something called American exceptionalism. And American exceptionalism is an idea. If you don't embody the idea, then you're not exceptional. The idea was that there would be a place on this planet where anything was possible for anybody. The whole notion of the founding of this country was an idea of the intention for the possibility of self-actualization. Even though there were slaves, Even though from our earliest days we stood behaviorally in contrast to the very principles on which we purported to stand, the irony is, as I said, not unseen by anyone. And yet the fact that that has been the intention has kept us going, moving always in that direction, sometimes slowly, sometimes taking some steps back, many times taking steps forward. Now this is the deal. The American mind at its best, which is, as Eisenhower said, both liberal and conservative. The American character at its best is one that goes like this. I have a great idea. Let's do it this way. In churches like this, people coming up with spiritual principles that were like, okay, we don't have to do it the old dogmatic doctrinal ways. Let's do it differently. In business, this is what makes Facebook happen. This is what makes Steve Jobs happen. It's when somebody says, wow, I have a great idea. Let's do it this way. In medicine, in healing, we don't have to listen to only what the allopathic Western tradition says. Wait, I have a great idea. Let's do it this way. That is exceptional within anyone. That is what happens when the human heart says, we don't have to be tied by the way we were in the past. We don't have to be in the effect of the past. We don't have to be in the effect of old ideas. That's why it was called a new world. And here you can be anybody, you can do anything. Revolutionize medicine, revolutionize business, revolutionize anything, whatever you revolutionize. But there is one place in America today where there's no room for a new conversation, where it's stale bread, where there's no room for somebody to come in and say, let's do it a different way. Why? Because of the chokehold that two-party system has, because of the money in politics and so forth. The conundrum, however, is dangerous. It's dangerous, it's unsustainable. As the French say, if you do not do politics, politics do you. So, after this election, we have some very important work to do. We have important work to do if, as Americans, we believe that the fact that an economic ordering principle by which money is so obscenely and immorally placed before life itself, before the welfare of our children, before the opportunities of our poor, before the liberation of women, before the protection of the earth, on such a level that people of conscience and people of consciousness look and almost can't believe what we're seeing, and we can't believe what we're hearing, and yet it is happening. And what I've seen in my career, and what we've all seen in American society, and this is, once again, the beauty of our country, it is amazing what occurs when Americans start having a new conversation. The abolitionists did not have faxes, they did not have phones, yep. They did not have computers, and they had no money to speak of. And they were standing before an economic system that relied upon slavery, and that was well ensconced hundreds of years. But they had a better idea. And they had, therefore, what Martin Luther King calls cosmic companionship. The women's suffragettes did not have cell phones, they did not have computers, they did not have power. But they had a better idea. And as Martin Luther King used to quote, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And society works the same way a species works. If you come to a point in the life of a species where your behavior is not well adapted for the survival of the species, then mutations occur. And then, even though the mutation does not represent the majority of the species, because the behavior of the mutation points in the direction of survival, what will happen in that species is either it will go extinct or it will move in that new direction. What is happening in our world today is that we are behaving collectively in a way that does not support the probability of human survival on Earth. We fight too much. We fight too much with weapons of mass destruction. The United States alone has over 7,000 nuclear bombs. We have situations that are absolute powder kegs. And I do mean literally powder kegs. And once again, I know where I am. We're in New York City. New York City knows. New York City, unlike any other place in this country, knows this stuff is very real. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this powder keg is very real. And I don't know about you, but I find it terrifying that the primary consciousness that dominates the political field, that it's figuring out what to do now, is people by people who don't even know what we're talking about when we talk about a journey of love and a journey of miracles and a journey of deep consciousness and understanding. They're not keeping us out of the conversation. We're not contributing our piece yet. And I believe it's time. If you've been through whatever your spiritual or religious practice, meditation, prayer, yoga, recovery, whatever, if you have within yourself come to embrace and own and use and apply the principles which change one life, you're the one who knows what changes the world. You're the one. You're the one, because all that a nation is a collection of individuals. Well, like I said, I've been saying for a long time, the era of data collection is over. I've been talking about these things in public for almost 30 years. And I know many people, I see some of the faces who've been doing this stuff for a long time. We can't wait for the day when we're complete enlightened masters before we show up to help. So what has happened is that the era of data collection is over. The era of consciousness is already well begun. Now, as I said before, speaking about Gabby, speaking about Jackie, it's about the age of collaboration. Not that we look to one person and think that they're the answer. Not that we look to any one project and think that it's the answer. That's not what this is about at all. As a matter of fact, if the United States learned anything during the 1960s, it's that you cannot allow a true social revolution to be led just by a few individuals. They kill them. But you cannot shoot a choir. You cannot shoot a song. And there's a new symphony that is rising up. But let me tell you where I think we are right now. I was speaking at Esalen. Somebody else mentioned Esalen earlier. I was speaking at Esalen about 3 weeks ago. Esalen in California, a great transformational mecca of sorts. And I was talking about the things we're talking about here today. And I was talking about Sister Giant. I was talking about the fact that I'm doing this in association with the Women's Campaign School at Yale University, where we will be talking about child poverty, and we will be talking about incarceration, we will be talking about Citizens United, we will be talking about women's leadership, we will be talking about training women to run for office, because so many people don't even know totally what's involved. And it was very exciting. It's like us here, people transformation, talking about politics, and so forth. So one woman, and to me, this symbolizes the only thing we need here. She comes up to me. Now, this is Big Sur. This is a few hours drive from LA. This is not like getting on a plane to come to LA from New York. Although, as Gabby said, live stream. She comes up to me, all excited. This is fabulous. I think this Sister Giant thing, this is so important. This is what we need. We need people of consciousness talking about nonviolence. You are so right. When Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi said love is a force that would heal political and social relationships as much as personal relationships. This is so amazing. We need a new nonviolent movement. We need to stand for love. We need to come together. We need to do this. We need to find the people who actually want to run for office and train ourselves so that even if we don't run for office, we're at least sophisticated about the conversation so that if someone we know wants to run for office, we know what to do. We become really connected. You are so right. That is so fabulous. I responded. That's so great. So you're coming to Sister Giant? And she said, no, honey, I can't. She said, I'm a mom, and I mean, that takes up my whole life. And I said, oh, you have a little baby? How old is your baby? And she said, 22. I love this one, too. It's a male. And you just know that her 22-year-old son is saying, Mommy, please don't leave that way. I love another one. Oh, I can't come out. All my friends in LA. That is the immaturity we need fear. That is the immaturity we need fear. You know, nothing, if we're ready to even have this conversation, we need to be serious and emotionally and psychologically and intellectually sober people now. If we have this conversation, but we only have it superficially, if we have this conversation and just allow it to be a good feeling, rah-rah for an afternoon, it won't have any political heft. The resistance to changing the ordering principle of human civilization from economic values to humanitarian values is very strong. You better believe there would be resistance. Just as there was resistance to abolition, and there was resistance to women's suffrage, and there was resistance to civil rights. You better believe will be laughed at. You better believe will be ignored. You better believe will be mocked. You better believe will be marginalized. You better believe will be trivialized. And if we get serious enough, you better believe we will be opposed. But you know what? There's only one thing we need fear. And that's if when I call Jackie, she doesn't return my call. When I call Gabby, she doesn't return my call. Because if we get about each other, I'll be at your right, and I'll be at your left, and I'll be in front of you, and I'll be behind you, and I'll be above you, and I'll be below you. And anytime they mock, and anytime they trivialize, everybody else who just heard somebody else mock and trivialize for standing for love says, stop right there. I'll tell you a few facts. Stop right there. On what basis would you say that? Stop right there. Let's have a conversation. If one person stands up and says these things, that's lovely. If 10 of us stand up and say these things, how wonderful. If 1,000 of us stand up and say these things, we done good. But none of that will be enough. Now I've heard people, and you have heard people probably as well, say, no, Marianne, you don't have to worry about the planet. The planet will be okay, no matter what happens. Even if we start with the nuclear bombs. Even if we frack away whatever our planet is. You don't have to worry, Marianne, because the planet will be fine. It just might have to throw us off for 250,000 years or more. I'd like you to take just a moment and consider the almost inconceivable amount of human suffering that would accompany that scenario. I want you to think, as only you can think, about September 11, 2001. And multiply that by many, many, many times. And allow it to penetrate your heart, what it means to be a parent, thousands of which exist right this moment, holding a starving child in their arms, with no food to give them, and watching them die. And I hope that you will join with me in believing that between the opportunities that have been afforded us by the blessing of being a citizen of this country, which despite its problems, is still kick-ass wonderful when we get it right, and who have had the blessing in our own individual lives of learning through our spiritual journeys and through our deeply, deeply heartfelt paths of spiritual renewal, have learned something about redemption, and have learned something about transformation, and have learned something about growing up, and have learned something about becoming truly mature people. And if you and I join those two together, I believe, as the Course in Miracles says, an idea grows stronger when it is shared. And if we join in a morphic field of new possibility, because as the Course in Miracles says, an idea grows stronger when it is shared. And we know it's not enough to just think on these things. We're going to take it to the next step now. And we're going to collaborate with each other. And I hope that you will come to Los Angeles for Sister Giant if you can. You will live stream it for sure, not because Sister Giant is the be-all and end-all, but because anytime anybody is having a conversation about these things, all of us should be there. Yeah. If we do that, we will have nothing short of a miracle. The Course in Miracles says there is no order of difficulty in miracles. The Course in Miracles says the beginning of salvation is when we consider the possibility that there might be another way. You know, when we vote in a few days, the very fact that people of color will be able to vote, that didn't just happen. People made it happen. The very fact that women will be able to vote didn't just happen. People made it happen. People died so these things could happen. People suffered so these things could happen. You know, there was a time in this country when any time a woman had a serious opinion about anything political, that there were all these men that would just pat her head and say, don't you worry your pretty little thing about that, darling. The men will handle that. What a mockery of every everything that suffragettes stood for and sacrificed for and suffered for, if we are a generation of women who don't bother our pretty little heads, nobody is even telling us not to bother our pretty little heads. That's when they've got it. That's when you've been so co-opted by a system, they don't even need to put the chains around you anymore because they exist inside your head. Liberate, liberate, liberate. Ladies and gentlemen, to make some changes. We had to make them quickly, or the planet itself, life on Earth, would be in peril. I was depressed. I remember sort of wanting to go to bed for 3 days. I was like, these are not the people we want to count on. I don't feel that way anymore. Yes, this United States and this planet is like a Titanic headed for the iceberg. We know that. We know that the probability vectors for the next 30 years are extremely grim. We know that that iceberg could be nuclear catastrophe, weather catastrophe, terrorism related, or anything else. And we know that in order to turn the ship around, we're going to have to move out of the time and space continuum as we know it. We have to move out of probability into possibility. Well, we know about that because we know the metaphysics of what happened when the Red Sea parted. It was not just symbol. It was not just metaphor. We know what happened when Jesus rose. Oh, it was not just symbol. It was not just metaphor. It was an absolute change in the molecular construction of the universe and the transcendence of time and space itself when minds are high enough and close enough to God. Ladies and gentlemen, we got some keys. Let's go use them. Let's go use them. Let's go use them. Thank you.